Hi, I'm Amber Young,
And I'm Barbara Phillips.
and this is Let's
Let's
Talk
talk
EVM.
EVM.
Welcome, everyone. We like to start with a disclaimer that is stated for myself and Barbara. And the disclaimer is that all of the views that are expressed on this podcast are our own, and they are not the views of the United States government. All right. So, with that, we want to get started on our topic today, which is going to be the case for transformative change. And we have two esteemed guests joining us for this. We have recurring guest Daniel Goldsmith and special guest Dave Kester. And we'll be hearing from them right after Barbara's soapbox moment.
Okay, thanks, Amber. I was thinking a little bit about this topic before we came to the podcast this afternoon, and thinking that in my experience with doing EVM surveillance and writing up findings in cars and so forth, how sometimes that's chiseling away at the reasons, at the things that are making the system not operate to create credible data. And sometimes is it better to have a do-over, sort of rip the Band-Aid and start again? That there's so much chiseling that needs to be done that perhaps just start with a new mold. So those are some ideas I've been mulling over today. So I give it back to you, Amber.
Perfect. I think we might be touching on some of that with our topic today, too. So we'll dive a little deeper when we get into that. But first, I'd like the guests to please introduce themselves. So we'll start with Daniel.
Amber, Barbara, thanks for having me again. I'm Daniel Goldsmith again. I work for Clear Plan Consulting, so I'm excited to get into today's topic.
Hi, I'm Dave Kester. I've been practicing project management for over 39 years, working in both public and private sectors. My last assignment was with the Department of Energy before I retired from government service in 2021, and now I have my own consulting service called Anthralytics.
All right, fantastic. Thank you both for being here. So to get us started, I want to toss it over to Dave and ask Dave, what do you think about the case for transformational change?
Yeah, great question, Amber. Thank you for that. What I've learned over time is that transformative change is needed. I'm just at that point. To make EVMS relevant once again, I believe a deep fundamental shift is needed that completely alters how EVMS is defined and implemented, as well as overseen. What I'm talking about doesn't just improve what already exists. It reimagines, it rethinks structures, behaviors, and culture.
All right. I think one of the things that we've been talking about or thinking about is that EVMS, EVM implementation does not have to be combative. So we have seen that. I want to hear a little bit more of your thoughts, either Daniel or Dave, on times you've seen that and why we really do need a change.
Yeah, I'll take that one first, Amber. Thanks. So we have seen that a lot in the past, sad to say. And we've talked about this in previous shows where, EVM is a bad word. But when all the parties get combative, it makes just the whole process a lot harder, And I'm not just talking about certification. Certification has its own purpose and is required. But even within just doing your day-to-day work, when it gets combative, people stop communicating. Decisions get delayed. The information might tend to follow more of a narrative instead of just, telling what the data says. So it leads, it's just like in personal relationships, when you get combative, you get angry, you say things. Same thing with EVM, it works just like that. If you can if that makes sense. So I think it's just all around bad and we've seen, especially with kind of some of the new methods that have been being used, if I can say that, in the industry, where it's more collaborative. Again, not just with compliance, but the way that the system works, it goes smoother. You get better data, and better data provides for better decisions. So that's kind of my thoughts. I'm going to hand it over to Dave, see what his thoughts are.
Thanks, Daniel. Good points. I think a pivot was made to making EVMS relevant and useful, and that happened in 2019 with the Department of Energy Office of Project Management sponsoring an EVMS study to look at this. And they partnered with the Arizona State University. That study is ongoing. The core of the study was the development of the Integrated Project Program Management Maturity and Environment Total Risk Rating, quite a mouthful there, but also known as IP2M meter. And that method has been put into place by the DOE, and there's been several earned value surveillances and compliance reviews using that format. And I believe that there's been nothing but success in doing that. And in my opinion, the transformative change and all that is the approach. Getting away from the traditional combative nature of how we do this to a more collaborative way of understanding each other's roles and responsibility, respecting that, and getting to the desired outcome, which is project success.
Fantastic. Barbara, any additional thoughts for the case for transformative change?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked what both Daniel and Dave were saying, but about that, I was talking about chiseling earlier, and here, your suggestion or you were saying about taking a more holistic approach with the environment, then there is no chisel, right? You're no longer nickel and diming, but what are you doing? You're changing the way. You're changing
Transformative. It is transformative. It's a completely different paradigm.
paradigm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Put away your
I-
hammers. Put away your chisels.
Absolutely, Barbara. Totally agree. And what's really unique about this is I believe it is a pivot away from traditional ways of doing it. Adding the feature of examining the environment, and again, not looking at it simply from the customer standpoint, but the entire IPT to include stakeholders, and having everyone on the same page doing the same thing, and just having honest conversations. And what was interesting about the ASU study was what it found overwhelmingly in its research was that maturity of the EVMS, and think of that as the effectiveness of EVMS or the state of compliance of EVMS, was purely a function of the environment. So this is where the transformative piece of this comes in, looking at something perhaps we haven't looked at before that really, I believe, is the key to putting EVMS, good EVMS, in place in order to do what they are intended to do, and that's to position project teams for success.
Can you expand a little bit more, Dave, on those different stakeholder groups that you just mentioned? Who gets to play in this game that you're talking about?
Yeah, good question, Barbara. So the format is everybody that is touched by or is touching that EVMS associated with the project. So this would include the customer, the local customer. It would include certainly the contractor, any kind of suppliers that are involved, as well as stakeholders. Internal and external stakeholders play a huge part in the success of a project and what they do or don't do. So if we can get those folks all on the same page talking, understanding what the true purpose of an EVMS is in the context of the environment that they create, we've made a good first step, in my opinion, for transforming how we do this.
I'm just going to ask one more question. I'll give it back to you, Amber, but I will confess to having some firsthand experience with this. But I think I'm trying to ask a question about, since we're using the word transformative, but what about light bulb moments? Can you and Daniel and Amber, can you guys all tell me about stakeholders having moments where they're like, oh wait, I get it now? Is that something you guys are prepared to share with us?
Hey, Barbara, this is Daniel again.
Great.
Yeah, I kind of want to. So we're actually on a facilitation this week, if that's okay to bring up.
Yep.
And I could definitely see some of those light bulb moments happening this week. I mean, for example, when we do the facilitations, we take in several different groups. Usually we separate out senior leaders, practitioners, local customer, that kind of thing. And you could definitely see, especially like with the practitioner group and some of the questions, you could see the little light bulb go off in oh, that's why it's important to have these conversations with, this other cross-functional specialist.
Yeah.
It's not that specific, but you definitely can tell, which is really cool. There's a lot of cool, and I'm not trying to get off topic, but there's a lot of cool stuff about the IP2M meter and the environmental part, because it's that squishy part. We've been doing maturity for 20, 30 years. That's been, looking at the 32 guidelines, running metrics, all that. But this environmental part is just really cool because it gets in between and really gets down to this. I know I just said it, but the squishy parts, how people interact together and talk. And it's that whole other part of the system that can't be metricized. So I know I got a little off topic, but yes, light bulb moments. I'll give it over to Dave.
Thanks, Daniel. Great points. Hey, Barbara, how I would answer that, the light bulb moment, when we see this, and we've done about 20 of these using the IP2M meter format, it's the environment. When we actually sit down and all talk about the environment and how those factors are, we like to think them as pressure points. And that's what the ASU study found. Hey, there's 27 things that tend to put pressure on that EVMS working as it should or shouldn't. As we take the time with those groups we mentioned and start talking about the environment, it just resonates. Everybody understands that the environment, the culture, is absolutely essential for positioning projects for success. But in the past, we've never really had a formal, structured way of doing that. And that's what's really cool about the IP2M meter. It allows us to do that in a very constructive, collaborative way. Again, as Amber said, we're out here conducting an environment assessment, and it's been nothing but kudos. Everybody really gets it. And you can see the light bulbs going off as to how this is going to help them.
Yes. There are many light bulb moments that I'm hearing. One is in the stakeholders, understanding who are the stakeholders and how they contribute to the EVMS and the effectiveness of that EVMS. It was an interesting conversation we had where stakeholders are everyone, even your local community, anyone who this project impacts or impacts this project. But not all stakeholders are going to know what EVMS is. And that's okay, so long as their needs, considerations, interests are reflected in the EVMS by those who know how to do that translation. So explaining that during the environment assessment was a bit of an aha moment for some of the folks that we were just with.
Oh, that's fascinating. I was going to sum up what all of you guys have said with, it's always all about the people, right? I mean, it's the squishy, the key stakeholders. I mean, everything you guys were saying, it's just a reminder, that it's one thing to do the metrics like Daniel was saying, but it's talking to people. It's about the people. So I do think IP2M meter is a breakthrough approach because it's a forcing function for people to talk. I know one outcome I saw on the one project I worked on is that the key budget analyst and the key scheduler elected to share an office when there are plenty of empty spaces around the office, and they could have each had their own like 4 walls with a door kind of a thing, but they said we just spent so much time running back and forth to each other's offices that we just
tear down the walls.
Tear down the walls. They just were like, let's cohabitate, so to speak.
Co-locate. Yeah.
Co-locate. Yeah. So
I love it. That's great. I want to take us in a little deeper and this a little bit segue into another kind of section of today's podcast. And I want to talk about what we've been referencing here. The reason that we're able to do this podcast in person with Daniel, Dave, and myself is that we are currently in Ohio State, in Columbus, Ohio, and we just finished conducting an IP2M meter environment assessment. We each were facilitators and presented the different categories and factors for that. And I just wanted to dive in a little bit on that facilitation, what it looks and feels like, so that listeners can get an idea from the facilitator's perspective. What is an IP2 environment assessment? What does that look and feel like? So I'm going to start and I'll talk to the area that I facilitated and a little bit of the structure. So essentially what happens when we have an environment assessment is we work with the project to get the different people who are going to take the assessment. And we try to get as many stakeholders, people involved in the project as possible and have them in separate groups. In this case, we had 3 groups that we were giving an assessment to. Each group has their own assessment time. And that assessment is about 3 hours. And we essentially present every category and then each factor in the category and have them enter. They listen to us facilitate that factor, and then they enter their rating and their comments into this system. So that's the flow, but I just want to talk a little bit about the areas and the categories. So in the IP2 there are 4 environment categories. There's culture, people, practices, and resources. And my area was resources. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of tidbits on the types of things we talk about with resources, because yes, to Barbara's point, people are very most important, but we also want to see what other factors, those pressure points that influence the environment. So in resources, when we're talking about that, we look at anything that your project needs for success, for the EVMS implementation success, throughout the entire life cycle of the project. We look at the tools, technology. We look at funding, which is very important. We look at staffing and capacity, and we look at experience, authority, and then battle rhythm, and then data. So those are the types of things we want to look at and understand. And to Dave's point, we start to then have a conversation around these pressure points, really understanding to that level, where are those areas that maybe in the past were combative, but now we have a way to talk about it and pull out what we call the gold from the comments on where are those concerns or those issues, or even those great things we want to talk about and promote, and kudos for the project. So my area was resources, and I wanted to see if each of the others want to talk a little bit about their area and give a feel for the types of things that we want to talk about in each of the categories. So next up is Daniel. He's going to talk about his area.
Thank you, Amber. So the main area that I covered this week was practices, which if I could just read a little, this is a summarized view of the practices section, but it's essentially looking for, I'll read it to you straight up, demonstrated through the documentation and application of optimal management practices to achieve project deliverables and performance outcomes. It also looks at the consistent application of proven management practices and helps align project execution with project requirements, applicable standards, and a broader organizational objective. So this is looking at like your system description, all the various EVMS requirements, are all the roles and responsibilities defined, making sure there's no gaps, making sure everybody knows who to talk to. You know, is there cross-functional coordination? Is there a subject matter expert you can go talk to? Is everybody speaking the same language? You know, do they know where to go find the processes and procedures? So again, that's not something, like I said before, that you can metricize, but those other softer things that are very important for the health of the EVMS, but need to be looked at. So with that, I'll hand it over to Dave to talk about the last 2 sections.
All right. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, so let me spend a little time on culture and people, the last 2 categories. Culture is so significant, right? Culture is about beliefs, and beliefs lead to behaviors. And hopefully those behaviors lead to doing the right things that are expected of that EVMS to be implemented as it is intended to be implemented. We like to think of the culture as the broth of the soup. It's the flavor. It's whether it's too salty or not salty enough. The culture provides that broth from which everything else swims in. And we like to think of these other categories: people, practices, and resources. Those are the key ingredients of that soup. but the culture is so important to getting that right to make this all work. So the culture is important. People, right? People are essential. People are what make things happen. People are, we like to refer back to Jim Collins, Good to Great, the book of his, Management Practices and Leadership, is about putting the right people in the right seats to do the right things, having those people incentivized, having those people energized, and having those people knowledgeable and experienced on that EVMS so they can do what's expected of them. So those are the 4 categories.
All right, fantastic. I want to see if Barbara has any thoughts on facilitation.
Facilitation in the experience I had is really very demanding because it is in person and you're really looking to make sure that people are understanding what those factors are. Because, they can be, well, I don't know if I can say something that will shock people, but it was really, some of them were written by like people that are academics,
Barbara, you can say something that will shock people.
Oh, really? Oh, thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, it's allowable.
Yeah. Some of the ASU, some of the write-up is a little academic in nature. And so it's the facilitator's job to make it relatable. And I'm sure the 3 of you were outstanding at it today. But, to really read your audience, read your room, and, tell, I've been recently zeroing in on the power of stories, right? To make the impact and to really have people give proper consideration to those ratings. I've been sort of waiting, Amber, for you to get to the data part because data is your middle name. You have a lot of middle names on this podcast, but because eventually these these ratings are frankly their opinions, right? You guys correct me, but there's a scale. You read what's on each measure of the scale, and you make your own expert judgment. Each individual gets to do that, and then I'm going to leave the rest of that part to you, Amber, to explain if you want to.
Yeah,
How it gets moved to that.
And Barbara, I'll give the mic back in just a second. I do want to stress what you said before was quite key. We were amazing. So I just wanted to add that.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, they were amazing.
Put little halos on everybody's image.
But overall, it was a very good facilitation in that the project that we were facilitating were very participatory. And, they were, this was the first time every single person was early and ready. That was just tremendous and got great participation. So great team that we worked up with today. Talking about data, that's a whole other beautiful area with I'm seeing right now the visuals. Dave Kester is actually the author of one of our famous charts where there's this. Imagine a matrix where there's 27 factors, so 27 columns, and then all of the groups are on the rows, and you have all the scores, and then you look at the deltas between averages and the scores, and then there's it's passion that's being characterized by the colors, the reds and the greens, and the density and the brightness, and how much passion was being expressed by these different opinions. So this really cool matrix that pops out insights. So there's a lot of really interesting visuals that we are creating, a lot of great analysis, and we are also incorporating AI and large language models to help us do the analysis because data is not just numbers, right? We have the comments, which are they're
the gold. Barbara.
They're the gold.
And I want to also say
Goldsmith, but okay.
The EVMS was passionate this week.
It was
a passion project. This is a passion project, people. Don't forget that Amber and I are doing this as a passion project. So.
That is true. But the data is not just the numbers, the ratings and the scores. That is definitely there. We could do tons of slicing and dicing, but it's also the comments. And we do a lot of analysis, SWOT analysis, sentiment analysis, all kinds of different types of analysis on those comments. And we have on average 1,500 comments per
Wow.
assessment, right? And that is multiple sentences per comment. That's a very large body of text to read. So we have the AI do it, but we vet everything. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff coming. All right, with that, I think I'm done. I have a little tiny ambling at the end, but if everyone wants to give like a closing thought, and then I'll close this out with an ambling.
I'm done. Thanks.
Thanks, Amber. Thanks, Barbara. This is Daniel again. Yeah, so just again, transformative IP2M meter, especially the environmental stuff that we're looking at this week, facilitating, kind of all wrapping everything we just talked about up. It was a great week, and it's a great way to look at EVM. It's the squishy stuff, and I think the way that it's being implemented, and I don't know if Dave will want to talk more about this. I know we're wrapping up, but the way that it's implemented, it's not punitive, which is really good. And that's really, at least in my experience, the only way to get true, honest comments is by it not being punitive.
Well, it's anonymous.
And it's anonymous, exactly. And the way, like Amber was saying, the comments are the gold. Let's just give you an example. Somebody may rate something as doing really good, but then their comments are like, "Oh, this is the worst place ever." It's like, well, hold on a second. What's the truth here now? Are we looking at a data point, or are we looking at a frustrated employee? Vice versa, they rate it really bad and they have glowing things to say. So the comments are the gold. This non-punitive way to assess the squishy part of it is great, because especially once they get into the maturity side, if there's any findings, 99.9999%, if you do, a 5 why root cause analysis, drill down into what the issue was, or what caused the issue to happen, it gets down to an environmental issue. The program manager wouldn't let us raise the EAC, even though all the metrics were telling us we should. That's not something that you're ever going to fix based on just metrics until you get to talking to the program manager to tell them why it's important and get them to realize that. So with that, I'm sorry. I almost was on a Barbara soapbox. I'll hand it over to Dave for his closing thoughts.
Thank you, Daniel, and Amber and Barbara. Thank you for having us. This has been tremendous. I would just offer up to your listeners just to have an open mind, be open to new things. I think we're on to something here. It's working. We're seeing that firsthand here. Again, we want to make this a very collaborative, positive experience as we examine our EVMS, as we use our EVMS, how we even look at and define our EVMS. Sometimes there's a better mousetrap, and I would offer up to your listeners to maybe give it a go, because it is really worth a look. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Barbara.
Before Amber does her amblings, I know Amber is very diligent in everything that she does, actually. But I know she's going to put in the, there's a little description section that goes below the podcast, and I'm sure she'll put links in there. But Dave, do you want to just tell people how do people get more information about IP2M meter, just so we can record it too?
Yes, certainly. There's a litany of reports on the Arizona State University webpage for the IP2M meter. All you got to do is Google that, and you're going to see the entire litany of the research. There's multiple reports on different topics, and it would be worth the read. It's very interesting information, the material. Again, keep in mind the research is ongoing. They're continuing to look at projects. One of the positive outcomes that came through the research was that there was strong correlation between the environment and maturity. This is where they fished out that there was even an environment element to looking at an EVMS, and they found that those projects that had a functioning EVMS and were genuinely committed to it ended up in a more favorable state, and that to get to that state, it had everything to do with the environment. So again, I'd go to the Arizona State University IP2M meter. Just Google it. You'll find it. Click in and have a feast at all the materials that are at your fingertips.
Thank you.
Hey, Barbara, can I add in one more thing? Sorry, I just thought about it while Dave was talking. On and I believe, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, on the same ASU site, there's a list of certified facilitators.
Oh, is
So
my name on there? Go ahead and check.
I think it is,
Yes.
and my name will be on there after this week. Not saying
Okay.
anything. Clear plan.
Maybe we'll try to get, little plug there.
Little plug. Sorry about that.
But Dave, we'll have to check if your name's there.
But seriously, I mean, if people have an open mind or are interested, they can pull from that list and get advice, have them facilitate an assessment. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Let me just give you some specifics on that, Barbara. If you go to that website, there's about 20 people that have their certifications to date, and there's about 20 people in waiting that are going through the process that are very near being certified. The idea is that should you be interested in this, there is a community of these folks that know how to administer this if you're interested. And if you're really interested, then get certified. Become a facilitator and lead your company into a better state.
Oh, that's beautiful. Amber, what could you possibly say after that?
Well, two things. One, this is a short ambling, remember? So I had already had them loaded. But I do want to say one thing. Dave is on the certified list. So just making sure everyone knows. But in closing, the last thing I did want to say is really a little bit of a cliffhanger that the conclusion of the IP2-meter ASU study is really that key concept that maturity is a function of environment. So we really, really want to dive into that, and we will in an upcoming podcast. So stay tuned for more.
I can't wait.
And that's all that I've got. So that's it for today. I think we had a great session. Thank you, Dave and Daniel, very much. And I think we'll sign out. That's it. And I'm going to let you take this one, Barbara.
Okay. And that's all from Let's Talk EVM.
EVM.